of days when you're like, "God, this is hard craft." In them moments, I'm like, I'm going to be the smug one on the passing out parade. I marched over straight away and I told you I'd do it. We lost on that particular tour 5 grenadiers, seeing lads sort of lose limbs and obviously like lose their lives. And at the time, it was like, this is everything I wanted to do. So they'd sort of stacked up on the outside of the building to go in and clear. But where I happened to be stood on the day, as the first pair went in, the rounds came through the wall. There were moments where I think, had I embraced the feeling, I probably would have gone there and then.
Even though virtually, as you're a man that deserves a big introduction, to be honest. I've read your book twice. I've got it here, Strength of Mind. Give it a shout out on the camera. It's an amazing story. It's one of the best books I've read in the last year or so, and I think it's just because it's so humble. Do you know, it's down to earth, it's moving. It's a book about your life. It's a book about your strengths, but a lot of it's your weaknesses and how far you've came along. But with each guest, if that's all right, if we can take your story and go back to how it all began, where you grew up, how your childhood was, and we'll work through and tell the listeners what you've achieved with your life, which is amazing.
Yeah, thank you, mate. And firstly, obviously, thank you for inviting me on. I really appreciate it, and it's humbling to know you've read it twice. I don't think I've even read my book twice. I read through it to make sure there were no spelling mistakes and stuff. But yeah, thank you. That means a lot. It's obviously in terms of the book and everything I sort of put into it, I've been very fortunate with the things that I've done over the previous few years since I lost my leg to have had people that have wanted to follow my sort of story and my journey as an amputee. But I never thought for a second that I'd end up putting it into words or that people would want to read it. So it's always really nice when you speak to someone that has actually read it. I still find it surreal. But yeah, like I said, obviously I felt putting everything down into words was its own. I'd already sort of had counselling in the few years previous, but to put it all down into my own words and get everything off my chest, because although I'd had the counselling, a lot of what was discussed only really I knew and my wife knew, whereas then to put it into words in a book, then everybody and anybody knows.
Yeah, of course.
So
you're opening yourself right up, you know, and you're just waiting for obviously the feedback, but also waiting if you're going to open up all wounds, both with your own thoughts and obviously people reading it that you refer to and stuff. Obviously the book starts away from basically your family life, primary school ages. On reading that, it wasn't the easiest school years for you, to say the least.
For one reason or another, sort of middle school and stuff were absolutely fine. I'd always grown up playing football. Like, football was my life from sort of 7, 8 years old all the way sort of through my childhood. So that was always my go-to, my release. Sort of 6-7 days a week I was on a football pitch in some capacity. But then it's what I associate all of my sort of happy memories with growing up. In terms of sort of school, once I got to secondary school, similar to in the military, I suppose, when you turn up on a new course and things like that, you try and be the grey man, you keep your head down, and just the longer you can go under the radar, the better. And obviously when you go up to high school, I took that same approach. But I suppose at that age, it can be seen as a weakness. And I suppose that got picked apart. So yeah, I mean, from the age of sort of 13 to 16, school was not an enjoyable experience at the time. But I look at it in hindsight, and I think it was character building. In the long run, I certainly didn't feel like it at the time, but it did me good because it gave me a resilience, a stubbornness, just and a real will to want to get away from where I lived.
Yeah, definitely.
to go
Was it
and
just?
sort of,
But to tell us more about, was it just the usual school bullies? They just seen you, like you say, you wanted to keep your head down, you weren't getting involved in anything, and they just see you as an easy target. Something that they wouldn't say now, that's for sure.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it's definitely fueled what I've done the past few years, I suppose.
Yeah.
But yeah, I suppose I was an easy target, and yeah, you're easy pickings in school and that environment. But it was more the sort of physical aspect of it is most of the time sort of walking home from school. If you're out sort of socializing after school, yeah, there's not many football photos of me growing up where I haven't got a black eye or a missing
Yeah.
tooth or so. But yeah, at the time you sort of question a lot of things. I probably still do question it because, like I said, I suppose I was very sort of quiet, and it was only really the football pitch where I sort of came to life.
Yeah.
Because it was a separate group of people from different schools and stuff, so you're a different person. But yeah, I had a group of friends, but obviously, I suppose at the time they were predominantly a group of friends where if push came to shove, I was left on my own.
Right. Okay.
So
Yeah.
yeah, so it took a lot to then trust people as well in that sense of, and it's something that stuck with me. And the military in particular is the complete polar opposite. Obviously, like in that school environment, if the same crowd came around the corner and thereafter my school friends were going to sort of step aside and leave
And leave
me
them to it.
to it.
Yeah.
And I remember how that obviously felt. And I always sort of, whenever you sort of got into aggro in the army, which obviously, it's part and parcel of the job, like it happens on
Yeah. Of course. Right.
your nights out and stuff, like remembering what it was like to be left on my own to sort of face that. It's always been one of those things where no matter sort of the situation, like I'd never leave anybody else in that position. So yeah, and I've tried to sort of use it as a positive, use it as motivation, and yeah, I suppose even now at sort of 38, 39, they're always there in the back of your mind of, I always still have to prove myself, but maybe I owe some of the things I've been fortunate enough to do to that group of people, because they gave me that stubbornness
That
and
fire. Yeah.
yeah,
No,
definitely.
definitely. They fueled your fire later on in life to show basically that you were everything that they thought that you weren't at the time.
Yeah,
Do you know?
yeah,
So take us back. Obviously, you touched on that you just wanted to get away from the area that which you lived in. You weren't particularly close to your family. That you lacked the kind of male role models in life. And do you think that's part of the reason you sought out the forces? Do you think that you wanted to be looked after and feel like a belonging to a group, a family, a new family, a new brotherhood almost?
yeah, yeah, definitely. That's how I would describe sort of some of the blokes I've served with is a family. Yeah, where you feel sort of valued, and equally having, I found always having older male role models. So I found obviously those, when you go through basic training, the instructors and people like that, they've got life experience and something about them, and you think, I can learn from that man.
Yeah,
Like, so I found myself from sort of day one in the army, like there was people I looked up to and aspired to be like, and obviously when you're in training, it's probably not reciprocated.
yeah.
they're,
No, of
they're
course.
not they're not a father figure in terms of they'll have a nice conversation with you, but
Yeah.
weirdly it's a relationship where you hang off their every word and you look up to them.
But they
And yeah,
can't show you any of that back. Do you know,
no,
they
no,
need to
no,
they need to keep you at that arm's length. Do you know, even if the odd time they slip up and be nice to you, and you think, oh fuck, he likes me.
yeah,
I take it
yeah,
they soon reminded you that actually no, they
yeah.
didn't. They didn't that much. So tell us about your obviously applying for the forces, applying for the army. It didn't go to plan first of all, did it?
No, so I wanted to join. Obviously, finishing school at 16, I wanted to join straight away. But if you're under the age of 18, you need sort of basically your parents' consent. And my mum didn't want me sort of joining because I'd made it clear I wanted to go off, and a lot of people sort of look at the forces as going and getting a trade, becoming a mechanic, an
Yeah,
engineer, and I was very, I want to join the infantry. I want to be sort of an infantry soldier. So yeah, at 16, um, for one reason or another, at school I seemed to have a talent for design and stuff like that, but it was never really like an interest of mine. And that's what my mother wanted to push me into, was like sort of graphic design and stuff. And it's like,
yeah,
it's not really what I want to do. And I went on this college course, like a national diploma in graphic design. And even on my interview, I sat there and I said I want to join the army. Like I did everything I could to like sort of
just to
balls
steer
up
everything
the
away
interview. And yet somehow I got a place on the course. And yeah, like obviously after the first year, you have some of the students you're on the course with that are going off to look at universities. And in my head, it was like, I'm just biding my time until I'm 18 and I
and
don't
that's
need that consent. And then, yeah, I'd gone through the sort of paperwork side of it in the careers office. And then I went and maybe it was a delayed reaction to obviously everything in school, but I ended up with really bad acne at sort of 17. And so I ended up on this really strong medication. And so when I went up for my first medical, I failed it because of the medication and this,
no
obviously the
way.
skin condition. So then I had to wait 6 months of being off this medication. Then I went back again for selection, and I failed it on a heart murmur. So I got referred to a heart specialist, and they said it will have just been nerves, like your heart's
Yeah,
fine. Um, and
gave
then,
you the okay.
yeah, and like it was just like every time I got a setback, it made me want to join even more. So when I went up the third time up to Lichfield and I got past the medical, and it was like, wow, I don't really know what happens now for the next obviously couple of days. You do all your
Yeah,
fitness tests, your team building, all that like command tasks and stuff. And yeah, I wasn't really sure what to expect past that, but it was like, right, I've done nothing but fitness for the last couple of years, so this bit will be fine. So once I got the medical out of the way, and I got my sort of start date and obviously the regiment that I'd chosen, and yeah, then it was like, this is my ticket sort of to a
out
new
there.
life.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And we spoke just briefly off camera there that basically I took your book on holiday with me to the Isle of Skye, and there's a comment from your father who we should say you get on kind of better with now, but he basically says to you, "You're not good enough to be a soldier. You'll be back in a week." And I can
yeah,
remember, I just remember because I knew your story, although I hadn't read the book. I obviously read the synopsis, and I'd followed you online. And I thought, I fucking, I lost the head on holiday. I threw my book down, and my wife was like, "What's the matter with you?" And I was like, "Can you believe Mark's dad just told him he was never going to be good enough to be in the army, and you'll be back within a week? Who says that?" And she was like, "Right,
yeah,
calm down, calm down." And I just think, there with you, like you'd experienced a pretty shit childhood through school years. You had a father figure that wasn't protective in any way of you. You were going out to seek that level of
yeah,
protection and brotherhood, and there's him still kind of stamping all over it. Whether it was meant like that or not, or it was just a kind of old school comment to try and tough you up in the future, we'll never know. I just remember that one comment stuck in your head, but you proved them wrong.
that same comment obviously stuck in my head. I can still picture it now, like where we were stood and stuff. We were in the garden, and yeah, and for obviously the basic training was 26 weeks up in Catterick. And every time there was there was a lot of days when you're like, "Oh, this is hard
Yeah,
craft." And all I ever thought was like, "There's not a chance I'm going back home to be greeted with a almost like a smug, I
yeah,
told
I
you you
can.
wouldn't make it."
Yeah, totally
Um,
picture that. Totally picture
yeah,
that.
so that the times when you're doing your bayonet fighting and you're going through the assault course and you're covered in sheep's blood and water and you've not slept in 36 hours, and in them moments is like I'm like I'm going to be the smug one on the passing out parade. And to
Definitely.
be fair, I was obviously, when you march over to your families after you've passed out of basic training, and I marched over straight away and I told you I'd do it. And obviously, like, to this day, he sort of says, "Oh, it was just to motivate you," but
Right. Okay.
but at the time, it was just another person that had no belief in me, and obviously no one in school thought I would be able to join the army and stuff. And so at that moment, at the end of that 26 weeks, it's like I've done it. Like, this is going to be my career.
Definitely. And then you must have had flashbacks to all the faces, obviously your dad included, but the faces of the school bullies and the people that had made your life a misery, and just thought, "Fuck you!" Do you know, I've proved you wrong, and you're more of a man than they'll ever be. Do you know what I mean? So, absolutely no regrets, obviously. So the regiment that you joined was the Grenadier Guards.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's a frontline infantry.
Yeah.
But they also have their ceremonial duties as well, is that right?
Yeah. So we everybody sort of recognizes us as obviously the tunic and bearskin, the red tunic, big bearskin, stood outside Buckingham Palace, Windsor Castle. So funnily enough, when I went into careers office and I said I'd like to join an infantry regiment, I didn't have a specific one, and it just so happened that the lance sergeant that was on the desk that day was a grenadier. And it was like, we'll put my regiment down. And at the time, it was still VHSs, it was still videos, so there was like a couple of videos to watch and stuff. And then you start looking online, you're like, wow, like. So I do feel very fortunate that I didn't just join any infantry regiment, to have that dual role and that responsibility of the ceremonial duties. When you look back now and to think, like, obviously to take my children to see Buckingham Palace and they see the soldiers out the front and you go,
that's what I used to do.
So now it's definitely something you look back and you go, I was privileged to get to serve in a regiment as prestigious as that.
And was there certain soldiers that would that basically joined to be a ceremonial soldier? That was their thing. They didn't want to be like frontline infantry, whereas your preference was to go out and do what you signed up for, basically, in terms of being a soldier, a frontline soldier. Did you get to choose between the two to a point?
So we have a ceremonial company, so they're non-deployable, so they'll still go overseas for jungle training, Arctic warfare training, all that sort of stuff. So they'll do the training side of it, and that's a stepping stone into battalion, where obviously you deploy on operational tours. Some lads, be it family men and stuff, may end up back there through choice, and they'll opt. They might have done 2, 3, 4 operational tours and go, actually, I'm ready to just have a bit of stability now, be based in London, do ceremonial duties. And so you do have the both, whereas the battalion, the 1st battalion, is a fully deployable infantry regiment. So from time to time, you'll cover the ceremonial duties, but predominantly you're away sort of Afghanistan, Iraq. So I quite liked that there was the two sides to it.
So you enjoy the ceremonial side as well? To me, that would be a nightmare. I can't imagine how uncomfortable that would be. But obviously, you enjoy that to an extent as well.
I think so. It wore thin sort of there in the summer months. So you'll mount Queen's Guard for 24 hours in the summer, 48 hours in the winter, and there'll be times when your rifle company is being bounced back to back, and you'll end up doing 10 days of on and off Buckingham Palace. And obviously, each time that you mount, your kit has to be immaculate. And so obviously you come off the guard, and in that 24 hours, you're rehearsing to go back on guard on the parade square, plus getting all of your kit back up to standard. And so then it tests how proud you feel to do it.
I can imagine.
It can wear thin in those moments. But yeah, obviously things like the Queen's birthday parade at the time, obviously like trooping the colour and things like that. That's an amazing sort of spectacle to be a part of.
A massive event to be part of, definitely.
Yeah.
Do you know? So moving on, kind of through your military career, you then your goal was to serve. Your goal was to go on an operational tour, which you done a good few of, I believe.
Yeah. So obviously being in Nijmegen company straight from training, I'd done my sort of 6-7 months of ceremonial duties, and then, like I said, obviously that acts as a stepping stone into the battalion. And one morning on roll call, sort of register, they said there's 4 spots to go out to Bosnia. Who wants to go and join battalion? And it was like, I'll go, yeah. And then about 2 days later, I was flying out to join. So the regiment had gone out 2 weeks prior to that for a 7-month tour, and then we were going out to join them. But battalion at that time was a sort of a big scary place. Again, somewhere you turn up, you keep your head down, you do as you're told. You at that time you had a lot of blokes from sort of the late 80s, early 90s that had done Northern Ireland tours, and just big, horrible, scary men. And you're like
hardened soldiers.
Yeah, you're a young, like fresh-faced 19-year-old.
It's funny because I take it the military, in the early years, certainly, you obviously join your initial training and you progress through the stages of that. And then as you progress through the stages of your training, your initial training, you obviously see earlier troops who you're a wee bit more senior to. And then you pass out, and then you think great, and then you go to battalion and you're straight to the bottom again. And then you need to work your way back up, then you get promoted and you're straight to the bottom again. So, you know, you're always fighting the people above you. Yeah, totally.
Yeah. But it's obviously you turn up, you're the new lad, so you get all the heavy kit, you get all the shit jobs, like everything that needs doing, the new blokes are doing it. But weirdly, like obviously because I was away for Christmas and New Year as well, so obviously that's the first time I hadn't been home for Christmas. And at that time obviously I was 19, single, no wife, no children, and it was like, I don't need to be
home. Don't need to be home.
Yeah. I loved being away. It was, again, battalion, because it was sort of older, experienced blokes, just so many more role models to sort of look up to and learn from. And yeah, it's like if I keep my head down here, it, in a way, it's sort of the opposite to school. Rather than being seen as easy pickings, it's, you sort of earn a better reputation just by doing what you've been asked to do. And
that's it.
So
they just learn, as soon as they learn to trust you, you know, and then you can start gaining some respect. You give it out, you get it back. I think you met a lot of really inspiring people through your military career.
So many people that you cherry pick their qualities from, especially sort of the leaders, the lance corporals, the lance sergeants, the platoon sergeants, where you go, I think, like, I've got a lot of admiration for him. I love the way that he does this, that, and when I eventually get to that responsibility, I'd like to be just like him. And then on the flip side of that, you do have ones where you go, when I'm a section commander, I'm going to be nothing like him.
Nothing like him. It's so true. Obviously, the people that you're kind of surrounded yourself with throughout, obviously, your career, some were forced upon you in the sense that they were colleagues and whatever else, but they had a huge influence on your life and shaped you as a person. Do you know, you're nothing like you were when you were a kid. Do you know what I mean? You've been shaped so much by your military experiences and the people that you've met. So moving on through the Bosnia, served in Iraq and Afghanistan as well. Had you a family at that point? Had you met your wife and had your kids at that point?
Yeah, I actually met my wife. So obviously, part of when you're on an operational tour, you'll get 2 weeks R&R where you're sort of flown back to the UK.
Yeah.
So in the January, whilst I was out in Bosnia, so I'd done Christmas and New Year over there, and then I had 2 weeks back in England in the January, so 2005. And my last night out, um, I some of my sort of mates from back home, we went out for a drink before I went away for another 3 months, and I met my wife on a sort of night out. So obviously, yeah, sort of saying to her, we sort of swapped like numbers at the time. Still at the time, writing it down on a bit of paper and that.
Yeah. 10 pence
Um,
10 pence a text message.
yeah, that's it. Yeah, just to make sure it was actually like her phone number and stuff. And then it was like, yeah, I'm going back to Bosnia tomorrow morning.
No.
So, but it almost added like something a bit different and fresh, I suppose, because our only way to communicate was once a week in Bosnia. You got a phone card, so you got 20 minutes once a week,
Yeah.
and then the rest of it was blueies, so forces letters that you
All
could
right,
write to each
brilliant.
other, and
So it was old school.
yeah,
Yeah,
just
brilliant.
getting to know each other through letters and
Yeah.
stuff,
Oh,
and
that's amazing though. Like I mean, how far detached is that from where we
yeah,
are now? Do you know,
oh yeah,
write a letter? Have you still got
yeah.
them?
Yeah. So
Yeah,
my wife's kept them all in the loft, like all of our letters from Bosnia,
brilliant.
Iraq, Afghanistan. They're all kept them all. But she used to sort of spray them with perfume or send me out. Like she'd sort of say, "Is there anything you need?" And yeah, I'd get like these morale, but like lads would always get like morale boxes from friends and
Yeah.
family and stuff, and you'd have like bags of Haribo and things from back home that you couldn't get in the sort of bases out there.
Yeah.
So she used to sort of put me together a parcel and send it out, and um,
Well, that's
yeah,
amazing. Yeah,
it
great
was nice.
memories. Well, she must have done a good job because you're still there, still
Yeah,
with her.
still here. Yeah, what was it 18, 19 years later? She's
Yeah, that's
she's
nuts.
still there.
That's brilliant.
So
So obviously, I'd imagine your regiment being a frontline infantry regiment, especially well, probably in Iraq as well as Afghanistan, but certainly in Afghanistan, um, the shit hit the fan there a lot for the forces frontline. Is that did your battalion or did your regiment experience their fair share of loss and injuries to your colleagues?
yeah, it was just sort of almost like commonplace at that time.
Really?
So I went out to Afghanistan in 2009, and yeah, just obviously we lost on that particular tour 5 grenadiers, and that was at the time when a lot of it was IEDs. Um,
Yeah,
so yeah, sort of seeing lads sort of lose limbs and obviously like lose their lives, and
yeah, horrific injury.
yeah, yeah,
Not a nice time to be part of it. But you done your country, you served your country, and you decided that promotion was maybe in order. You'd been getting good feedback from your NCOs and stuff, and you fancied a shot at was that becoming sergeant, becoming corporal at that time?
yeah. So I went out to Afghanistan as a lance corporal. So after we'd done an overseas sort of stint in the Falklands, and I'd then um, earned the opportunity to go on a promotional course after
Yeah,
that. So yeah, I went out to Afghanistan as a lance corporal, and it was one of those tours where I really sort of embraced it. In my mind, I'd always wanted to be, like I said, an infantry soldier. So
yeah,
Afghanistan, um, maybe now as you're older and you see it in a different perspective, I don't know if I'd have that same adrenaline, that same desire to be on a
yeah.
tour
Of
like
course,
that, especially
yeah.
sort of having a family. And but at the time, it was like this is everything I wanted to do, and so I sort of fully embraced every single opportunity to be in a firefight, in a contact, in those situations. It was like almost
Just social.
become like a like an adrenaline junkie. I think a lot
Yeah,
of lads became addicted to the feeling of being
yeah,
in contacts. And you'd almost go out on foot patrols or vehicle patrols, and if it didn't end in a contact, you'd see it as a wasted patrol. You
really,
almost, yeah, you almost sort of
yeah,
almost chasing that high throughout the tour.
yeah. Do you think that's because they say that you don't actually appreciate life until you've been so close to death?
Yeah, I
Do you know?
think
Do
so.
you
Like
think
you have moments where you're like, you come back into camp and you go, that was a
that was
we got
close?
lucky there.
Yeah,
And it's only when the adrenaline wears off. It happened a few times where you have that moment to yourself and almost like involuntary, you end up just bursting into tears. I remember
yeah,
one particular one, a night patrol, um, and there was a particular route that the British forces used that was always being IED. So we were basically going to set up an overwatch, to basically sort of catch the Taliban in the act of sort of laying the IEDs in the road.
yeah,
And we got ambushed ourselves on route to it. And that particular one, I was point man, so I was at the very front of the patrol, and we got sort of pinned down out in the open. And that was a night where, on the set of orders before we was going out, and they said obviously like Corporal Smith, like point man, and I remember just I always seemed to get this sixth sense of something was going to happen. And I said to my mate as soon as the orders finished, I was like, I got that horrible feeling. I said, I'm just going to use the satellite phone. I'm going to phone my wife, and she was in the cinema, so she had no signal. So I just left her a voice message because obviously you couldn't say I'm about to go out on patrol.
yeah,
So yeah, everything was just like, I've got a bad feeling about this one. And then no suit, we'd been out on the ground maybe 20 minutes. And then yeah, we got ambushed ourselves, and there was myself, the platoon commander, and another young lad stuck out in the open, ever so slightly in the dead ground, it had turned out. Um, and it was one of them instances where eventually when we got back into camp, other lads are like, how the fuck are we like
yeah.
still in one piece? It was just
So scary,
surreal.
so close.
Yeah. And
Just
that
at the space.
particular night, once the adrenaline had wore off, I was on the Sanger, so obviously you get back, so everything you have to man yourself. So even though
Yeah,
we'd been out on that patrol, still expected to do the sort of the midnight till 6 a.m. shift on the Sangers, and I remember being stood up there about 2 o'clock in the morning, just sobbing, and it was like what's going on? So yeah, you'd have times. I think it was just all the adrenaline's left you, and you just
of
feel drained
course.
and
Yeah.
exhausted.
Such a mix of emotions. I mean, I can only imagine. I've never served in the forces, but I can only imagine like going out to do an ambush, but then getting ambushed yourselves, and then you just basically facing death. Do you know,
Yeah,
just
yeah.
looking straight down the barrel of a gun, and obviously a slice of luck meant that did you all survive? Did you all come back?
That particular one, yeah,
Mm, right.
and it was weird. That's the first. I've put it down to like a nervous reaction, but then it became like a trait throughout the tour where in those moments you just start giggling. Like it just it
You
seemed
one of
to
these guys that you one of these guys that start laughing at funerals?
yeah, I probably would be, yeah. Like it just in those moments, like I'd look around and you'd see the other lads sort of, trying to sort of dig into the sand with their eyelids and stuff, and
Yeah,
I'd just start giggling. I'd find something, whether their helmet's tilted off to one side ever so
yeah.
slightly, or a facial expression, and I'd just get a fit of the giggles, and it was
It's
like,
just a
and
coping
when you tell
mechanism.
people like that back home, like obviously, I wrote, I kept a diary in Afghan so that I'd never told my wife anything on the phone while I was out there, and it was a case of I got back
Yeah.
and that's yours to sort of read when you want. And she couldn't believe, like, "What do you mean you were giggling?" And so I took, like, I always just got a fit of the giggles in those in the hairiest moments. I found the funniest, but
Yeah.
I didn't know why.
I think that's just purely a total coping mechanism, do you know? If you
Yeah,
don't laugh, you're gonna cry, and you did cry sometimes, but
yeah,
other times you were able to see the funny side of it, bank it, and then move on, deal with
yeah.
whatever comes next the next again day. Um, so tell us about your trip to Canada. not a trip to Canada, but
Yeah,
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 we won't call it that.
yeah. So I'd obviously off the back of Afghanistan, where it had been seen that I'd had a good tour. I was offered the opportunity to go on my next promotional course to become a lance sergeant. So this meant 4 months in Brecon, doing sort of tactics, skill at arms, so learning to become like a weapons instructor and all that sort of stuff. And obviously, at the time, my wife. So we always said we'd wait until after Afghanistan to start try for a family.
Yeah,
So my wife got pregnant in the leave after Afghanistan, and then it was like, well, the promotional course, you know, is a better income for the family. It's more stability. It's more
yeah,
responsibility in the job. I then had years of working under people, and it was like I'm ready now to be that. I've had enough experience now to lead. I want to
yeah,
be a leader. So yeah, I'd gone on the course, and day one, obviously they sort of said, you know, has anyone got any sort of compassionate? And I was like, my wife's literally 9 months pregnant, like, so she gave birth to my eldest 3 weeks into the course, and I still had the rest of the course to do. So I barely saw sort of my son throughout that course.
yeah,
Came back to the regiment, and then my company sergeant major had said, "You're going out to Canada for 3 months." So I said, I've not had any paternal leave, so I got a couple of days at home with my son and my wife, and then went out to Canada. So Canada was to be our pre-deployment training to go back out to Afghanistan the following year, and I loved the exercise part of it ourselves the first 6 weeks because I was a lance sergeant, I was a section commander,
yeah,
I was leading from the front then, and it was like I had the opportunity to put everything into practice that I'd learned on all the courses, and it was like I similar to obviously the coaching now, where it's like I love this responsibility.
yeah.
Um,
Thrive on it.
yeah, yeah, I really sort of enjoyed passing on my experiences to sort of younger soldiers that were going on their first tour and stuff. And but then once our 6 week exercise had finished, those of us where I'd done the skill at arms qualification and stuff in Brecon, it meant I was then qualified to not only sort of teach weapons but also oversee live firing ranges. So all the way up to sort of company level. So
Yeah, okay.
around about 100 blokes sort of covering vast distances.
Huge responsibility for them.
Yeah,
What age
yeah.
were you what age were you here?
So Canada, I would have been 26.
It's massive
Um,
responsibility for someone so young, yeah.
I know I was talking about it with another lad I served with the other day that actually when you think of the level of responsibility we had at such young
Well,
ages, and you look at the average 20 to 26-year-old as a civilian now and the experiences we'd already had, it
yeah.
yeah, you sort of you you're sort of older beyond your years, I
Oh,
suppose, in that
definitely,
sense.
yeah, you're forced to grow up very fast and make like,
Yeah.
such important decisions.
Yeah,
Definitely.
yeah, ones where obviously people's lives are literally
Yeah,
sort of your responsibility, and but I quite liked that it was almost that you become, even at such a young age really, like a that father figure yourself, the one that I'd looked up to amongst others, you now have a responsibility to be that for younger soldiers.
yeah,
So yeah, I then went on to join a group of safety staff, which was made up of um, corporals, lance sergeants, platoon sergeants from all different regiments. I'd never worked with any of these lads before, and the opportunity came up to work on the armored infantry. Obviously, we were dismounted, so everything we did was on foot.
yeah.
Um, and it was like, I'll I'll do it. And
Try
you
something
think,
new. Always the first one to volunteer.
yes, it's a different experience.
Yeah,
You get to go around on vehicles rather than on foot everywhere. It's like I've just been on foot across the prairie for the last 6 weeks. Like this might not
yeah,
be so bad. Um, and then I got to just pick people's brains. So some lads were out there on 2 year postings, 9 month postings, and so I was that probably that irritated one that just I wanted to be a sponge and just learn what I
yeah,
could. And then to become eligible for sort of an operational tour to be classed as deployable, you'll work your way up using blank ammunition up to sort of company level attacks, and then go on to live firing. So using live ammunition where you're firing at wooden targets, metal targets, all that sort of stuff. So the regiment I was overseeing and doing the safety for on the ranges, they work their way up, going down individually, in pairs, fire teams, sections, platoon,
Yeah.
and then they'd worked up to a platoon attack range that started off with tanks. So we would follow in the vehicles. When they dismount out the back, we dismount and follow. Then they had
Yeah.
trench systems to clear, bunker positions. So you're there overseeing them. And then in the morning, we'd done it with their other platoon, and then you push onto the compounds. But in the morning, I'd stayed with the fire support group, so the heavier weapons, the
Yeah.
sort of the general purpose machine guns and things like that. So I'd stayed back in this fixed position. But there'd been a few. There always comes a point with officers that oversee ranges where everybody wants the most realistic range, and sometimes sort of safety gets sacrificed for realism a bit.
Yeah.
And there'd been, even as we'd gone through in the 6 weeks ourselves as the exercising troops, there'd been a couple of close calls. And it has its place in terms of you quickly switch on, you do everything properly because the
Yeah.
risk is there. But this particular range just felt it was there was too much risk. And
Was your sixth
yeah,
sense kicking in again? Yeah.
yeah, and that
Really?
particular
Yeah.
morning, I'd sent my wife a text with the time difference, just saying I got that same horrible feeling today.
Really?
And she kept the text message, and because I was in the back of the vehicles going from the barracks out onto the prairie, and I just sent her a text before the signal went saying I just got that same horrible feeling today. And we'd stopped for lunch, and I'd sort of raised my concerns, but ultimately I was a lance sergeant working with higher ranks from different regiments, know
Yeah.
your place sort of thing.
Yeah.
And the temporary staff, people like myself, there was always a shortage of kit, radios, high visibility vests. The safety staff was supposed to be in desert camouflage as opposed to sort of greens,
Yeah.
DPM. So I went onto these ranges, and the bigger the scale you go, so by the time you get to a platoon attack, you're looking at 30, 40 soldiers going down a range. And if you're not in tune on a radio and stuff, it's very easy to lose sort of situational
Yeah, of
awareness of
course.
what's
How do you
going on
control
around you.
that? Yeah.
Yeah, and so I was going down these ranges without a radio, without a high visibility vest, without sort of desert camouflage, and just it was like there's a lot of failings here, but again, it's that I need to wind my neck in and just sort of keep
Yeah.
my head down. So we went down in the afternoon, except the section I was following this time didn't sort of go firm at the trenches, but pushed on to the compound. So they'd sort of stacked up on the outside of the building to go in and clear, and I would have been due to go in with the last assaulting pair to clear the final room. But where I happened to be stood on the day, as the first pair went in, the rounds came through the wall, which was because obviously they're designed to get shot to pieces for 6 weeks, knocked down and
Yeah.
replaced. They were just sort of MDF buildings.
Yeah.
So the rounds came straight through the wall, and I had my back to the wall. So I took six gunshots to my right glute that sort of exited via my groin, hitting my femoral artery on the way, and then one to my shoulder as well. So obviously at the
That's
time the
major.
range was stopped. And then that's when I became heavily reliant on those I was working with that day.
That's crazy. Obviously hitting your artery just meant that you were losing blood so quick.
Yeah.
Were you still conscious at this point? Did you
Yeah.
realize what was happening?
It's obviously had that happen in Afghanistan, there's a slim chance I would still have the leg. So you obviously when it comes to the Chinooks and that coming out to take you back to sort of Bastion, if that's in
Yeah.
Afghanistan, you'd have the golden hour. So as long as
Yeah.
you're on the operating table within the hour, and then you had like the platinum 10 minutes. So
Yeah.
if you're treated within the first 10 minutes, you got a great
Very
chance
good
of
chance.
surviving.
Yeah.
But because it was Canada, there was a lot of miscommunication, and so I had no pain relief throughout the duration. There was no Chinooks or anything like that. The heli they originally sent out, they couldn't get my stretcher onto, and I spent 90 minutes on total on the ground with no pain relief, waiting to be airlifted to hospital. And then, yeah, it was just solely down to the lads that I was working with that day and the experiences they'd already had from other operational tours that they improvised and kept me alive. And I, yeah, had no sort of pain relief, but stayed conscious throughout. But there were moments where I think had I embraced the feeling, I probably would have gone there and then. But you just, even though there was no pain relief and I had tourniquets on my leg was being kept elevated. I had hemorrhage control packing out my shoulder. My lung had collapsed, so that I had a drain just
Right.
pumping my sort of right lung, and then at one particular moment, I just felt so warm and relaxed, and all the pain stopped, almost sort
Right.
of like floating as if you've been given morphine.
Yeah.
And it was that I'm going, and I know I'm going. And then, yeah, one of the lads gave me a good sort of slap round the face and stuff, and brought me back round. And
That was you basically. Your body was preparing itself to
yeah,
die, and
yeah,
your mind, thankfully, was strong enough, and probably your colleagues there that were working on you and helping you obviously realised that you were starting to slip away. So a good
yeah.
slap around the head. How was your? I mean, how was your wounds? Six. Is this an assault rifle bullet? So
So it
big
was
round.
a light machine gun, so
Right. Okay.
5.56 ammunition.
Right. So it's huge rounds.
Yeah.
So and there was exit wounds as well. Obviously, they would have been massive. How did they? Was tourniquets enough to stop that catastrophic bleed?
No. So one of the lads had applied the tourniquets, but I was still obviously with an arterial bleed, still
Yeah, of
losing a lot of
course.
blood.
Yeah.
And he had improvised and had clamped off my artery
Right.
with a paper clip, of all things. And yeah, just that sort of moment of improvisation sort of kept me
Just
kept me
saved
alive.
your life.
Yeah.
And did things obviously start to speed up in terms of getting you out of there and getting you some serious treatment, some life saving treatment?
Once I was on the heli, once I was on the helicopter on the way to the hospital, I suppose I made the mistake then of thinking, "That's it now, I'm gonna be alright." So I relaxed. I was on there with a
Right.
medic, and yeah, that's when I flatlined. So I was gone on the heli on the way
Wow.
to hospital. So all in all, it took just over 5 minutes to resuscitate me. Um, so
What using what means? Like a defib, or was it?
yeah,
Yeah. What
yeah,
was it?
so
Your
yeah,
heart rate had just
yeah,
stopped.
yeah.
Right. Okay.
Um,
Jesus.
so the long term implications of that, which are obviously less visible, are that I ended up with something called a hypoxic injury, so a lack of oxygen to the brain. Um,
Right. Okay.
so yeah, my short term memory is absolutely horrendous. But
Good excuse for forgetting everything.
it
Brilliant.
does, yeah. I've got post-it notes and stuff everywhere, but yeah, in the early days, I could get away with if the wife had asked me to do something and it didn't get done. So, well,
Yeah.
you know, I got
Now
my
there's
injury.
notes. Now there's notes everywhere to remind you.
Yeah. So there's no forgetting now. But um, yeah, I'm just really grateful that I worked with some phenomenal people. Obviously, there was
Yeah.
phenomenal sort of medics, surgeons all along the way, um, and then obviously concurrently to that happening, my wife's getting that dreaded knock at the door that all military
Of course.
wives have, to say what's happened. And
And
I
of course,
suppose,
when she was on the other side of the world, it wasn't like it happened
yeah,
in this country, do you know?
yeah,
Jesus.
and probably is more of a shock because obviously the times when I'd got on, she'd dropped me off at Bryce Norton to go out to Iraq, to Afghanistan, and
Yeah.
there's an expectance there that that might be it.
Yeah.
Whereas obviously Canada, it was like, see you in 3
Yeah.
months.
Yeah. You've survived three tours in war zones, but
Yeah,
it's a training exercise in Canada that nearly
yeah.
cost you your life. How did this decision come to amputate?
So I had been on life support for a couple of days, and I still had the leg at that point, and my wife had been flown out,
Right.
um, and at the time, obviously, my regiment wouldn't tell her if I was sort of alive because they weren't sure if I would still be alive by the time she got to. I'd been um, transferred from Medicine Hat Hospital closest to the Prairie onto Calgary. So she flew out to Calgary, um, and every time they'd try to sort of bring me off the life support, I'd go again, and basically the drains that were attached to my leg were just, it was all black fluid.
Right. Okay.
So the leg was starting to kill me, and it was starting to give me organ failure.
Right.
Um, and then eventually, when they brought me off the life support and sort of stepped in almost instantly, there was just a moment of confusion. I remember sort of laying there thinking, my wife's had her hair done. That was the first thing that entered my mind. She'd had
Brilliant.
her hair all done while I was away. So I asked her about that, and then this surgeon stepped in and sort of told me the seriousness of my injuries, and that if they sort of didn't amputate my leg that day, it was highly unlikely that I'd see that day out, just because of
That
the
close.
organ failure that I was starting to get. And um, in that time, they'd been pressing my toes and stuff and asking if I could like feel it, and I was like, "Oh yeah, yeah, of course I can." And
Well, really?
it turned out
Totally.
he'd been doing that for ages, and yeah,
Right.
but I'd obviously had friends from the previous couple of Afghan tours who had lost legs,
Yeah.
and those who had kept their knee joint um, tended to make a lot more progress, and some of them could stay in and still be operationally deployable, as long as they could meet all the fitness
Yeah.
requirements. The below knee lads could stay in, whereas I'd seen sort of friends who'd lost their knee joint as well struggle, just sort of walk with a limp, seem like they're in a lot of pain all the time,
Yeah.
on a lot of medication, and um, I actually refused the amputation at first because they said I would be above the knee, and
Right. Okay.
I knew that that would bring an end to my career.
Yeah, there's just so many limitations would be put on you. Just that
Yeah,
lack of mobility, do you know?
yeah, yeah,
So you fought against it until you were just over. Basically, it was life or death decision, really.
yeah, yeah. My wife gave me a stern talking to and told me to stop being so stupid, and
Yeah.
then obviously I sort of agreed to it, and within hours of the first stage of the amputation, I started to sort of pick back up. It obviously it was needed, but I had to
Yeah.
keep going back in to take more, so they were trying to sort of beat the level of infection.
All right. Okay.
So it meant that they took my adductor muscles went, my hamstrings were gone, 3 of my 4 quads they took. So I've only got sort of one essentially working muscle, and half my glute is sort
Right.
of gone.
Okay.
So what was left, they weren't sure I would be able to have a prosthetic leg
Because there's
because of the
nothing to
amount
attach it
of,
to, really.
yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, on the one hand, you're sort of laying there and you're like, well, I'm still alive. I'm going to get to see my son again, and all this sort of stuff. But on the other hand, it's like that's my career done.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, it was a lot of sort of tears in that. Well, ultimately, I spent a further 2 weeks in Calgary, and then the MOD flew me back to the military ward in the Queen Elizabeth in Birmingham,
Right.
where I spent a further 9 weeks. Um, and but even on that flight, it was sort of touch and go, and I was back in intensive care when I got to Birmingham. And one of the things that was a sort of private thing until I wrote the book really was that I almost lost everything that makes you a man.
Yeah.
There'd been a lot of complications down there, obviously with the blood flow and everything
Yeah.
like that. And I mean, it had swollen to a size to be proud
Proud
of.
of.
Yeah, it was like a 2-liter Pepsi bottle by the time, but it was horrendously painful.
I
And
can
my wife
imagine.
had mentioned it to the doctors when I got into Birmingham, and they basically said I'd had blood clots and I was on the verge of losing that as well.
Jesus.
So, and I think had I lost that, I don't know if I'd have wanted to pull through.
Yeah.
I think,
It's tipped you over.
yeah, yeah. Whereas it's like, I mean, even when I was shot, one of the lads cradled that and showed me. That was just to reassure me it was all still there.
Really?
Yeah, that was
The
always
things that guys do in the heat of the moment.
yeah. It's he knew
Amazing.
in that moment, as long as he knows that's there, everything
Yeah,
else you
we've
can
still
deal
got
with.
a chance of him fighting
Yeah.
on. Oh, Jesus.
um,
That's crazy. So obviously, let's not forget about your shoulder. You were shot
yeah,
in the shoulder as well.
yeah.
Um, what was the seriousness of that? Did that kind of recover? Did that still need operated on, I take it?
Yeah, so for the
Yeah,
first few days, I hadn't moved the arm, and they thought that the round had hit the nerve, so they thought I would end up losing the use of the arm. And I was more worried about that. I was thinking of things like being able to pick. Obviously, at the time, my son was only 5, 6 months old,
yeah,
and it was like you sort of dream of sort of being able to pick them up. And so I was more concerned about the arm than the leg because I'd had friends who had lost legs and were now walking on prosthetics and on running blades. And I was
yeah,
like, I'll walk again. I don't need to worry about that. Like, so it took a while for me to move the arm. Um, but it day to day, like sort of living, obviously cosmetically, it doesn't look great, but um, it more affected me sort of later on when it came to things like strongman. That's when it
mm,
really sort of hindered me and held me back. Um, but yeah, I just see it as I'm grateful I kept the arm.
yeah,
That
definitely.
would have been much harder.
Much tougher to deal with. Obviously, you kind of moving on from your obviously obviously near death experience, but you actually nearly experienced death several times.
Yeah.
You know, obviously, mentally, you would have been in such a difficult place. You know, you're now an amputee. You've got your life ahead of you that you're facing. Your love of football, your love of sport, your love of your career, the outdoors. You know, obviously, all these things are going to be going through your head about how your life is going to change. Um, how low did it go for you mentally?
I would say my time in hospital and then obviously later Headley Court, when you go through your rehabilitation, um, you're surrounded by squaddies who ultimately have all kept their sense of humour.
Yeah,
Everybody's got a gratitude that they're still alive and that it could have been worse. And for
mm,
a lot of those lads, those that were blown up, they in that same sort of situation, 9 times out of 10, someone had died in that same IED blast. So for them,
they were the
they
lucky ones.
yeah,
Yeah,
and then looking around, obviously the lad opposite me in hospital was a triple amputee from an IED, and the lad next to me was missing both his legs. The lad opposite was due to have his leg amputated, and I'm looking around and going,
I've done
I,
not too bad.
yeah, I've got nothing to complain about. So when you're around those people, and they're positive,
Yeah,
it rubs off.
of course.
So you
Yeah,
have that sort of positive attitude, and you're all grateful that it could have been a lot worse. And obviously, I'm looking at them going, I've still got 3 of my 4 limbs. So in that moment, you feel positive in that sense, but the football was playing on my mind a lot and my career because I never had a backup plan. I'd always
yeah,
intended to do a full career in the military. Um, but the low points probably didn't come for another probably 3, 4 years or so.
yeah,
Uh, yeah, I think when you're going through your rehabilitation, because I was so driven on I'm gonna walk, I'm gonna run, I'm gonna do this, that, and everything was a stepping stone. Again,
Yeah.
sort of, I'm
Yeah,
gonna
there
tick
was a
that goal off
focus
to
and
the
a
next one.
target there.
Yeah, and then shortly after coming out of hospital, my wife fell pregnant with our youngest son, and obviously because of all of the issues I had down there, they didn't know if I'd be able to have any more children.
Yeah.
So um, to then obviously have that, I then had something else positive to look forward to. So we then just had lots of positives really in the first
Yeah.
2 years or so after losing the leg. But being sort of discharged from the army and then handing in your ID card and stuff, and you're no longer serving, you're a veteran, then the reality hits you like, what am I going to do for the next 40, 50 years? And I didn't, even in my sort of 2 years at Headley Court, there were some lads that were like, I'm going to go off and do this now, and I'm going to retrain as this and that. And that's when I started to feel lost.
Yeah.
Um,
There was
as,
no other plan. You just your purpose had disappeared from you.
yeah,
You were
yeah.
time
And
to do
it's,
something new.
I needed a challenge, something that was going to get me out of bed, because it gets to the point where you're like, what's apart from having a young family, what's the point in getting up? Like, what's my, I think every sort of man needs a purpose.
No, definitely, yeah.
So yeah, I'd sort of grown a healthy obsession with being in the gym during my rehabilitation,
Cool.
and I said, well, throughout sort of my time at Headley, I used to sit there in the evenings on the laptop looking online at what different amputees around the world had done, and there were 4 or 5, mainly in America, that had prosthetic legs that were up on bodybuilding stages and stuff. You know, like,
Brilliant.
and then I sort of sat my wife down one evening and was like, I want to do a bodybuilding show, and that sort of then
Started
spiraled
a lot.
the next chapter. Yeah,
You're the next chapter of your life that ended with you being dubbed. I'll need to read these out or try to memorise them, but there's that many. Britain's strongest disabled man in 2016 and 2017. Completed in several world's strongest disabled men competitions. Winner of disabled strongman events at the Arnold Classics in in 17 and 18, and still the record for the world record for that Atlas stone lift. Is that right?
yeah. It
140.
might have been broken now. Obviously, I've been out with it for a few years, but
Yeah.
yeah, it was.
So that's amazing when you say that you got the bug for the gym during your rehabilitation. I mean, you didn't have like you got yourself into some, and you still are in some shape because you still train now. But tell us about that. Like you just you became obsessed with that, didn't you? Really, just that was your purpose, that was your focus, and you were going to get there and compete.
Yeah, I
Tell
mean,
us about your journey there.
yeah. In terms of the bodybuilding, the way I saw it was judges. Obviously, it's about opinions and stuff, but judges are gonna critique you for what you've got left and not what's missing. So I'm not going to be looked at on stage as he's got a prosthetic leg. I'm
Yeah,
going to
there's
be
three,
getting judged
three other
there
limbs to look at.
for everything else that I am
Yeah,
capable of training and looking after.
that's an
And I
amazing
thought, sorry,
That's an amazing attitude, just you've got three other healthy limbs there and you're going to make
yeah,
them, and obviously, not just your limbs, your torso and everything else. But there's a lot more to you, even though you've lost one leg, you've still
yeah,
got a big old body there to build on and turn it into what became really impressive.
yeah. No, thank you. And that's it. I saw it that if I can stand up in a theatre on stage with the lights on me on my own in front of hundreds of people, and stand there with a prosthetic leg confidently, be judged, be critiqued, be criticized, then I can walk through a shopping center as an amputee without sort of worrying or caring for
Yeah,
people's views of how I look. So it was a big confidence boost. it was something I only ever intended to do once, just to say I've done it, I've proven
Yeah.
myself. Similar to obviously where my dad had said you won't last a week in the army, and it was I'm going to prove you wrong. I'm positive that when I told some of the lads that I serve with, I'm going to do a bodybuilding show. At that time, they were probably like, "We'll see," and then I did it, and then it's like I've proven myself. But off the back of that, I wasn't too au fait with sort of social media and stuff back then and what goes on, and my time on stage in my first competition had caught the eyes of someone running the national sort of bodybuilding federation in America. So sent me a message and invited me over to compete in
Brilliant.
Houston in
Amazing.
Texas.
I mean, you must have been so ecstatic to do something that was just basically a once-off to try and help, obviously, your physical health, but your mental health, make you more confident in just going about your future kind of day-to-day life, resulted in you getting an invitation.
Yeah.
It just shows you when you try something new, do you know, it opens so many doors, or it can open so many doors for you. You would never have known that your life was going to take that route.
Yeah, I couldn't believe the positivity that came off the back of that one show, and like you said,
Yeah,
the amount of doors and opportunities that opened up for me after that, and just obviously that particular one when I went out to Texas, it was the Phil Heath Classics, obviously the 7-time Mr. Olympia,
yeah, yeah.
and the organizer that had invited me over, I'd done my posing routine on stage in the prelims, and he'd called me over. He said, "We've got a surprise for you this evening." So I've gone back to my hotel for a few hours, walked back over to the arena in the evening, and then Phil Heath does his guest pose. Obviously, at that particular arena it could seat about 4,000 or 5,000 people. It was
Oh, massive.
phenomenal. And then they interviewed him on stage, and he said he wanted to invite someone that had come all the way from England onto stage with him. And I knew from backstage I was the only English person, and
Oh,
my
no
mouth
way.
was going dry. And yeah, and he invited me on for like a pose down, and then
Oh,
that
that's
ended up
amazing.
in Flex magazine and Muscle and Fitness, Men's Health, and it's like,
Brilliant.
wow, like I didn't expect any of this, and it just took me back to when I was in hospital and how underweight and stuff I looked from sort of being so ill, and
Yeah.
now I'm stood on a stage in America with one of the greatest ever bodybuilders.
Flexing next to him.
Yeah, yeah,
That's
and
amazing.
it was incredible, and
You
yeah,
deserve it. You deserved it, Mark. That's no doubt about that. You know, you definitely deserved that recognition for not only what you had went through, but the transformation that you had done it to yourself, and there was only you that you could only credit yourself with working so hard to achieve that. You know what I mean? It was amazing. I seen the pictures with Will Heath on the stage, and you could see the smile in your face
yeah,
standing there, and you're standing there in your thong, all
yeah,
all tanned up with these big shiny white teeth. It was such
yeah,
a it was a nice picture and video. It's cracking. It was amazing.
yeah,
But it just shows you, I mean, there's an important lesson there for people that always that maybe want to make that step into trying something new. It doesn't need to be bodybuilding, doesn't even need to be the gym or fitness. It could be employment, relationship, anything. You know, you just never know what's going to come with something unless you make that first step. And it
yeah,
can open so many doors, do you know, definitely. I think there's so many people out there that just procrastinate. They just think that they're too scared to make that first step because the next 10 steps that follow, they just see as negative. And I think that your story in that regard is genuinely really, really inspirational. Totally.
oh,
Um,
thank you. Yeah, it's something I've been privileged to do, and it was nice sort of what followed that, to then have motivated other people with disabilities to step on a bodybuilding stage
yeah,
and to watch that part of the sport grow, and to have played like a tiny part in that through being given opportunities like that by people like Phil Heath and Lee Thompson, who invited me out, and to be given that opportunity and for them to see that then makes them go, I want to get on a bodybuilding stage. I
Oh,
want
of
to do
course, aye,
that.
definitely. Don't discredit yourself. Yeah, I don't think you played a tiny part in that at all. Do you know? I think you played a major part in that because, like you say, you were googling basically amputees over the world to find out what other kind of sport or things that people would get up to, and it was all American. Do you know? If
Yeah,
there was other people over here, then you would have found them during your research. But I bet now, if something similar happened to me, for instance, and I was to Google what you Googled, your name and picture would come up.
yeah,
Do
yeah.
you know what I
I
mean?
mean,
And
that's
countless
still,
other people that you've inspired, you know, that's but I think success breeds success in a way. And if you can it has that domino effect. And you're not going to be the last person to become an amputee in this country. And I think you've done
yeah,
it. Gave people an option to see what's possible, and they might not need to reach the levels that you reached as far as your success, but to be able to get themselves into the gym knowing that they can totally transform their body into something so strong and powerful, mentally, that's amazing. How did you then kind of switch? Then moved on from bodybuilding to strongman, is that right?
yeah, yeah. I mean, a large part of it came down to being hungry. So it's the bodybuilding was draining. It took a lot
Yeah, I
of.
can imagine.
I love the side of the discipline and the earning the right to obviously step on stage. But
Yeah,
come the end of 2015, gone into the sort of the off season side of bodybuilding where people can enjoy a bit more food and stuff,
yeah,
um, and I was enjoying that side of it. I'd where I didn't want to turn down any opportunity, I ended up doing 9 bodybuilding shows in 1 year just because I wanted to. I had all these opportunities, and I said yes to them all. At that point, it was,
yeah,
yeah, I'll do it. And
yeah,
so come the end of 2015, I was exhausted really. So I started enjoying my food a bit more, and in turn was enjoying being in the gym a bit more. Everything was a little bit heavier than what it was, and
yeah,
um, someone that had been following my page was responsible for Britain's strongest disabled man competition,
right,
and he had sent me a message and said we're doing an open day in Kent at this strongman gym. Why don't you come down, sort of try some of the events? Um, and I was really sort of I grew up watching strongman on the television at
yeah,
Christmas, loved it, and it was
yeah,
always something I thought I'd love to have a go on some of that. And but I was really skeptical because he said, "Oh, you know, we compete in wheelchairs," and there was a real stigma during my rehabilitation around it, which ended up being to sort of my detriment, I suppose. But if you've got a prosthetic leg, be on it.
yeah,
So I was very reluctant to go. I didn't like being at people's waist height and stuff, and I was like,
yeah, of course.
at the time, I saw going into a sport in a wheelchair as a backward step. Um, and my wife said, why don't you go down and give it a go? You know, keep an open mind." And there were loads of blokes there, and I'd never touched any of that sort of stuff before. Atlas stones, logs, cars,
Yeah,
trucks, all of that. And it's like, wow, I've seen all of this stuff on the telly.
yeah. I think it's such a kind of primitive um, way of training. Do you know? It's just
Yeah,
lifting and dragging and pushing and pulling. Do you know? It's
yeah.
pretty simple movements. I think that I can totally see the attraction with that. Definitely.
And I quite liked that obviously bodybuilding is a matter of opinion and no one will ever agree on who should have
Yeah,
won this and that.
yeah,
Whereas I liked with strongman, there is no grey area. The
yeah,
strongest person over the course of 5, 6 events wins, and
yeah,
people congratulate that person. So we did the events, and we went on to the Atlas Stones, and I sat down in the wheelchair, and there was like a 3-foot oil barrel that side and that side, and they said, "Oh, you left or right-handed or left-handed?" So they put the first Atlas Stone. It was only about 50 kilos on my left, and they showed me how to do it. Obviously, other people who had already been in the sport for a while demonstrated it, and then we got to have a go.
yeah,
And I didn't have any tacky or anything, and so oh, yeah, I sort of rolled it, put it on my chest, put it across, and they said, "Oh, have you done this before?" I said, "No, I've never touched one of these." They said, "Do you want to go up or wait?" So I'm already strapped into the wheelchair, like I might as well stay in it.
Yeah.
I was like, yeah, I'll try another one, and it went up to like the 70-kilo one. It's like that went across, and they said, do you want to try the 90? And I was like, oh, I'll give it a go, and that went over. And I think I did the 100 on my very first day, and the reigning world's strongest disabled man was there, who was a Brit, to show us how to do it. And I'd lifted the same stone that was his heaviest stone.
Jesus.
And it was
I
like,
bet he was pissed off.
yeah, he didn't look as supportive at the end. And we did like an interview together for like a strongman channel that was there. And they said, why don't you enter Britain's Strongest? It's in 6 weeks' time. I was like, oh, maybe. Like, I thought, there's no way I can compete with these lads in the space of 6 weeks. I was like, I've got none of the kit and equipment. But I phoned my wife on the drive home. And so how did it go? And I was like, I loved it. Like, I didn't care at that point about the wheelchair. It made sense because of the amount of weight you were expected to lift.
Yeah, I
There's
could
no
never
way the
support it.
prosthetic
Yeah.
could take it. Yeah, the prosthetic would just break.
Yeah.
And I got home, we talked about it, and I was like, I'm going to enter. I'm just going to do it.
Brilliant.
I entered for the competition, and I said, like, right now, I don't have to diet anymore. And so I just ate as much as I could for 6 weeks. None of it was the polar opposite of bodybuilding. I just ice creams, burgers, pizzas. I just got so many
Calories, just give me
calories.
food.
Yeah, everything I could eat, I was eating. The physique had completely disappeared in 6 weeks, and I just trained as heavy as I could, and I tried to pick people's brains in the gym and
Yeah.
just improvise a little bit. And we turned up on the day of the competition, and there were 23 of us, and I'm looking around, and people are warming up, and I'd recognise one of the lads from the wheelchair class in bodybuilding, and I was like, I know Darren, like, he's a really strong bloke. Like, I'll watch what he does. I'll pick his brains throughout the day. If I can get close to what he's doing, I'll have had a good day. And I thought, top 10, I'll be ecstatic. And then it got to the first event, and it was a truck pull, and I was excited. As like, I'm going to pull a
Brilliant.
truck.
It's an iconic event, that, isn't it?
Yeah, it's just brute strength.
Yeah, totally.
And because it was the first event, they went alphabetical, and they got to Smith, called me up, and it started raining. I was like, that's not a good start. And then my two boys, they were only sort of, I think, 4 and 5 at the time, 3 and 5, something like that. They were only little, and they come and stood next to me. I was sat down getting harnessed up because it's all just upper body, so you just pull it towards you.
Yeah.
And they'd made this banner and stuff, and they were sort of cheering me on. And at that point, that could have been about 5 trucks. Like, I was pulling it. It
Yeah.
was. I felt just incredible with them there.
Yeah, that's amazing.
And then I pulled it, and I got the quickest time, and it's like my very first ever strongman event, and I'm sitting top of the pile on Britain's Strongest.
Jesus.
And then I was like, wow, like, it was probably a fluke. Like, and then the next event went, I think it was the log, and I was sort of, I think, 3rd or 4th, and my shoulder really sort of let me down there with the gunshot. And then we went on to the Hercules hold. So it was holding 2 train sleepers. So around about 80, 90 kilos each hand on chains for as long as you can. And I set a record there, just over 4 minutes I was holding it for.
That's
Second place
amazing.
was about a minute and a half.
When I was listening, when I've been listening there, I actually forgot. Like, obviously, your legs amputated, but you actually forgot about the shoulder injury. So you think that your only kind of disadvantage is the fact that you've only got one leg, but
Yeah.
you've got a gunshot wound to the shoulder, and the whole
Yeah.
competition is just solely based on your upper body strength. And there's
Yeah.
you breaking records or setting records, and then coming first place in every event with a gunshot wound to the shoulder.
Yeah.
That's
'Cause
nuts.
it's one of those things, 'cause visually, obviously, in a T-shirt and a strongman, no one knows
Yeah,
about it,
yeah, of course.
and no one there knew me,
Yeah,
so nobody sort of, not appreciated, but nobody knew that
yeah,
all
of
of
course.
the shoulder predominant movements I would struggle with. And then we went on to a car deadlift, and it was a Fiat Punto. And then I went on that event, and the Atlas Stones, I just had to finish. I had to finish all 5 to win. And it was like, oh, I really like this one. Like when we practiced it, and I went and got all 5 stones up, and it finished. And it's like, wow, like I'm Britain's strongest disabled, and obviously they call you out from 23rd all the way up to 1st. And
Really?
I'm stood there, and it's like there's 2 of us left, and then it was like, wow. So I qualified for the Worlds, and I'd said to my wife, like, maybe in about 3 years' time, when I've gained a bit of experience, it'd be nice to try and push for maybe winning something, maybe try and get to the world's strongest. And in my first competition, I was off to the Worlds, and it was from there. I then went and bought logs, Atlas stones, ropes. Like I
Just
went,
threw yourself right in it.
yeah, I went to
Yeah.
strongman gyms. I went to train with like Lawrence Chalet, and it's like anyone that I can pick the brains of and learn from, I want to.
Do you think that was a kind of? Do you think that was a better moment for you than your bodybuilding career?
I think I enjoyed it more. I loved competition. Obviously, being on the
Yeah,
football pitch growing up, it's competition. Being in the boxing ring, it's competition. You have to give your best in that moment. And whereas the bodybuilding, the hard work's done all the way up to the day.
yeah,
Whereas the strongman, the hard work's done up to the day, and then the hard work is on the day.
and then some.
But I quite liked, like, I've earned this.
Yeah.
It's not 4 judges have felt sorry for me or anything. Like,
No, of course it's totally objective. It's based on your results, and no one can ever argue with that.
yeah,
Do you
yeah, and
know?
so I liked that side of it. But that when you asked earlier about sort of those low moments, obviously I was on such a high after winning that, and then 2 weeks after that, one of the lad who had sort of clamped off my artery and sort of played a big role in keeping me alive. We were from obviously different regiments, so I seeked him out for ages. Obviously, the MOD, because of the sort of the nature of how my injuries happened, were reluctant to pass on people's contact details. I just wanted to thank
Yeah,
them,
yeah,
and it took me a couple of years to sort of track down the people online that had been there that day.
yeah.
And I'd found one lad, and he was in near Swansea, and so he'd phoned me straight away. I'd sent him a message saying, like, obviously, this is how I know you. Phoned me straight away. Drove that night from Swansea to Milton Keynes.
No, no
We sat
way.
up all night talking. I think I hugged him for about 10 minutes outside the front of the house.
Brilliant.
And, yeah, I must have said thank you like in excess of about 100 times. And
No, no
obviously,
wonder.
children, and obviously my wife got to sort of say thank you properly. And we just, again, he was an older person, so he was again that sort of that father figure that I just sort of gazed at him, I suppose. Like,
Yeah,
just
of
I had
course.
nothing but admiration for him. And
Just a massive inspiration for you.
yeah, and we,
Plus the fact but what plus the fact he not only looked after you, he had saved your life.
yeah,
Do you
yeah,
know what I mean?
and that's the thing, is just in that moment, the bits I remember and stuff, he was one of the faces that was there reassuring
Yeah,
me and just talking to me and making light of it. And
yeah,
so we'd struck up like a really good friendship. Obviously, I owed him and the others like my life, but there was just seemed to be a bond. So we'd talk on the phone a lot, and he had like so much sort of belief in me. And obviously with the strongman, he had friends that were competing in strongman in Wales, and so he'd be sending me advice and getting people to contact me with sort of different advice and stuff, and just went above and beyond. And then yeah, 2 weeks after I won Britain's, he went and took his own life.
Jesus, man.
And that, I did it like that just because he would always sort of phone and ask how I was, but never really,
Talk
you'd
about
sort of ask
himself.
the same back, and you wouldn't really get much. and he was medically discharged from the forces with post-traumatic stress. Things like my injury had triggered other sort of things that had happened in his service, and he never really. Obviously, we were from different regiments. I had nothing but support from the Grenadiers, and he had no support at all from the Royal Welsh, and just was in a real sort of low place. And yeah, that really sort of like cut me up. But rather than sort of processing it, and I talked at his funeral and stuff, and got to know his mum and dad, and his dad had been a Welsh Guard, so it was like just you then felt like a connection with the family as well, and rather than sort of processing it, because I had the Worlds coming up, and it was like I'm going to use this as fuel and throw myself into all of this. But what I found over the sort of coming 3-4 years was that I'd take myself away before an event. So say you'd start a strongman competition with a truck pull, then you have a break, then you'd go into a log press, a break, then into a deadlift, and the day would go on like that. And I'd take myself away 2 or 3 athletes before I was due on, and just bring all of that back to the surface and use it. Put all of that into the event, and then just be on a real come down, like a real low, and then do it all again. And it got harder and harder to just sort of enjoy what I was doing. I was doing it all out of nothing but anger and upset and stuff. And the Arnolds, the second time I won the Arnolds, I'm in a hotel room on my own, half an hour after like lifting the trophy, just sat on my own, and it was like this is yeah, this isn't what I was sort of meant to get out of it. And yeah, it all sort of started to just bubble away, and obviously it was becoming more apparent at home. But like most sort of squaddies at that time, and now every time my wife sort of said about, you should sort of speak to someone, I took that as a bit of an insult, I suppose, to my
a weakness.
Yeah, or it's a weakness.
Yeah. It's just a kind of a man thing, isn't it? It's a male thing that how dare you you call me weak, sort of thing.
Yeah, especially to be doing strongman, but here I am at home being called weak, which I wasn't, but obviously that's how I took it. And but I knew I wasn't right, and I was doing the strongman, and I was doing sort of public speaking and talking in schools and stuff, and telling everyone how sort of wonderful life was. Since losing a leg, and then getting in my car and just breaking down, and then I started to have some empathy with what he'd done, and it was like that's the point I was getting to. Is like there would be a particular sort of bridge on the M1, and I'd visualize it every day, just put my foot down and go straight in. And it stemmed from obviously what had happened to Spence, but equally like I'd obviously taken strongman so serious, I'd put on a lot of weight. I'd gone up to 20 stone without the prosthetic even on. So I'd sort of ballooned in weight, so I was putting a lot of stress on the leg. The leg had obviously sort of ballooned, and I'd had a sciatic nerve operation that had not worked at all and made it a lot more painful. So I had the weight that was causing issues for me to walk full stop, the sciatic nerve that was causing issues, losing Spence that I hadn't properly dealt with, and it was just all bubbling away at the same time. And then we went on from the outside. Strongman was going fantastic. I'd won Britain's back to back, the Arnold's back to back. Like I was due to go out and do the world's strongest again in Norway, and I really sort of thought this is the year I can win this. I'd worked on all of my sort of weaker events and thought if I can get on the predominantly shoulder ones, if I can get middle of the pack but win the ones that I'm good at, I'll be in with a chance. So I really, that side of it, I felt confident, but I was getting no enjoyment out of it at all. It was just a means to vent.
The
And
built up anger and frustration.
yeah. So I wasn't nice to sort of be around in any sense, because I was using my anger in strongman, but then it wasn't sort of like, right, now I've got that out of my system, now I feel all right. Then it was just carrying on and carrying on,
Yeah.
and
So a
and
total
yeah,
cycle of emotions as well, do you know, a vicious cycle of emotions, and obviously still having so much trauma to deal with, both your own trauma and losing Spence as well. Do you know, every time you were trained for a competition, use that anger, and then you were winning it or competing in it, and then you would have a little bit of an off, and then you had to start that cycle again. Do you know, your emotionals were just all over the place, no time to actually work on them at all.
yeah, and just, you'd get to the end, and the Arnolds, for example, they announce it in reverse order, and you've won, and you're like, I feel nothing.
Really.
And yeah, obviously now to look back and be in a good place, I'm like, wow, I competed against the best in the world,
Yeah.
and what, like, now I can appreciate what a position I was in at the time, but then it was like, I just want to get out of here.
Yeah.
Like I said, half an hour later, I'm sat in my room on my own, because obviously the family, it was school time, so no one
Yeah.
had come out with me. I was like, what am I doing? And then yeah, we'd gone on a family holiday to Florida, um, and there was one particular day, so that I didn't sort of ruin the holiday, I didn't go on the prosthetic leg. I went in a wheelchair, which I hated.
Yeah.
I accepted it in strongman because there was a purpose to it, but I hated um, being sort of pushed and wheeled everywhere, and
Yeah,
just
you
not.
lost your independence, do you know? At least with your prosthetic, you can get about in crutches.
Yeah,
But if you're getting pushed about, it's a massive dent to your confidence and independence, definitely.
and little things like being able to, obviously you're on your dream holiday in Florida, and being able to hold the children's hands and stuff, whereas I'm in a
Yeah,
wheelchair. So it was just things like that. It's like, this isn't how I dreamt it would be. And then there was a particular day at a water park. The family had all gone down the slides, and I'm in the wheelchair, and then the lifeguard says I can't go down the slide, and then I'm sat in like 40-degree heat on the top of this like slide in a wheelchair, nothing but stairs or a slide to get down. Um, and I spent about 45 minutes at the top of this slide. My wife eventually sort of realised I was up there, came
yeah,
all the way up, came to get me, and then when we got to the bottom, I was like, I want to go back to the hotel room.
yeah.
And we got there, and that was when I just sort of said, I need I need help. And then I was honest with her, and I said, I don't want to be here anymore. I said, not
Yeah.
just Florida, just in general. And um, so
Did
that,
that come as a massive shock to her, or did she see the decline in you anyway?
she saw it, and it was more relief that I'd seen it in myself, or just
Yeah,
admitted
good.
it.
Yeah,
So we got straight on the phone to my regiment. So we have a retired warrant officer who now works as a casualty officer. So they're your go-to if you need
yeah,
housing adaptations or anything like that, any support from the charities. And said to him, I need some help. By the time we got back from Florida, I had funding for counselling sessions. I had a counsellor booked, and I could get started straight away.
start getting help.
Um,
Brilliant. Yeah, while
yeah,
you were in that mindset that you realised that the problem was there, and
yeah,
you were up for it, you were up for getting help.
yeah. Then it was bigger than just me. Then it was like, I'm affecting the whole family.
Yeah,
Um, So, but that at that moment, I said, I'm going to pull out of Norway, going to pull out of the worlds. Um, I need to obviously lose weight, so I'm going to start once we get back from Florida, because I'm still going to enjoy all the food out there. But once we get back, then I'm gonna start losing this weight. Hopefully, the leg will sort of feel better as a result of it. I'll pull out a strongman, so I haven't got the stress of getting ready for the worlds. I'll start the counselling, and it was like, this is the lowest point, so it's only uphill from here.
yeah,
Um, and then yeah, that's when sort of had a checklist of things, like if I can tick one thing off that's positive, then the next week, and then it sort of snowballed into more and more positive starting. And yeah, we sat together and wrote a list of all the things that I missed doing, all the things that I sort of no longer enjoyed doing, and the things that obviously came up because I wanted to be so professional. I'd almost cut off and killed off any sort of social life. So I wasn't sort of seeing any of the lads I serve with. Like obviously, when you're in the regiment, you're going out for beers most nights and stuff, and just yeah, like every day. Like I loved that camaraderie and I enjoyed being in the West End of London most nights and drinking in
Yeah,
the.
of
I
course.
loved all that side of it, and I'd lost all of that, and so I'd lost all the sort of social aspect of my life because bodybuilding and strongman, you're an individual, and everybody that's competing wants to beat you. So you're not a
Yeah,
team, you're not a part of something. You're an individual. So I never really liked that aspect of it. I always liked in the forces you were part of something. Um, you had a group, you had a family,
yeah, of course. Yeah,
but
definitely.
you didn't have that in these individual sports.
Yeah,
Um, and I said like I need to start sort of seeing mates and stuff again, um, and I said like I really miss playing football. So I contacted a few local. It was like walking football teams in the area.
yeah,
Obviously, it's meant to be for over 50s. I just contacted. I said, look, I'm an amputee. Like, would you mind if I came down? And they welcomed me down, and that was like the first bit. I was socializing with people on the football pitch, off the
yeah,
football pitch. I was starting to, get up and mobile a bit more. Starting to realize that actually I can spend time off my prosthetic. I don't have to be in a wheelchair. I can be on crutches, and it's like
yeah.
I was started losing weight, and it was like actually everything is starting to
Turning it a positive.
yeah,
Yeah, definitely.
yeah,
And obviously, you started. You then moved from obviously the walking football to joining. That you then found out there was clubs out there like the professional clubs. A lot of them have an amputee team. Basically, is
yeah,
that right?
yeah, yeah. So I originally the football was just going to be a social thing to get me out and
Yeah.
about, but with me, nothing ever stays just fun for very long. Like,
You wanted to be
it,
the best at that as well.
yeah, it's like, can I take this a step further? Like, what else
Yeah,
can I do,
yeah,
and how far can I push this? And um, yeah, I'd been looking online, and the local, the closest club that had an amputee football team was Peterborough United. So I contacted them, um, and they had a fixture coming up in London. They were playing Arsenal. They said, "Why don't you come down? Come and see what the sport's all about. Come and watch." I was like, "Oh, okay." Like, bring your stuff just in case,
yeah,
like, so you can have a bit of a sort of kickabout. Um, and then, yeah, turned up, and the lads were like one player short, and it was like, "Do you fancy playing?" I was like, "Oh, I'll give it a go." I was still, in comparison to the other footballers, I was still strongman size and weight and stuff.
yeah. Still a big boy.
I could barely move. Everything was cramping up. It was pouring down with rain, and then one of our players got injured in the first couple of minutes, so we were another player down and lost the game like heavily. But I come off the pitch and we was in a changing room, and it was like, I miss this. I miss
Yeah,
like there's
just
blokes
that
having a
banter being part of the team.
yeah. And then yeah, I drove home, and normally driving home is my time to sort of reflect, and it's like if I dedicate myself to this like I did the strongman, the bodybuilding, if I lose the weight, if I start getting myself on football pitches every day and practicing, I can only get better. So I did that. I sort of shifted the weight throughout that season,
Yeah,
and by the end of that season, we won the league, and I was voted Player of the Year.
What is
So
it with you? What is it with you starting something that you've never done before,
yeah,
and
my wife
then
said
just,
that.
and then just blowing the competition out of the way? I'm surprised you have any mates left because you just put them
Yeah.
to shame.
Yeah, I mean, the player of the year meant a lot because that was voted for by the other players.
Yeah,
So that
that's
really
amazing.
meant a lot at that time to know that I'd earned their respect, and I'd found somewhere where I settled in. Um, and obviously they'd seen how much I'd dedicated myself throughout the season
Yeah,
to trying to get better, and equally learning from them just as I did in strongman and the army, and um, little things like taping up the cuffs of your crutches so your forearms don't slip out while you're playing, and
right. Okay,
having your
just wee
crutches
tips.
slightly shorter so that your shoulders aren't taking so much stress. And
Yeah,
it was those are all things I could learn from people. Like I've always kept an open mind and always been willing to learn from people. And even though it was football, it's like this is amputee football. I
yeah,
could
it's
learn
different. Of
from them.
course, it is.
Um, so yeah, it was nice to find somewhere where I felt like this is a fit in here.
Yeah,
And I
back to
liked,
that team mentality.
yeah,
Winning and losing together. Do you know
yeah.
you're all in it together, working hard for each other. No, it's a great thing. How did Chelsea come about then?
So as I stayed with Peterborough for sort of 3, 4 seasons, I'd worked my way up there as well. And the manager at the time was a copper, and he was taking on a new role, and sort of pulled me to one side and sort of said, because I'd done my coaching badges as well, whilst I was still in the army, just for later in life. I thought I always
Yeah,
thought it was something I'd like to do one day.
yeah,
Um, and he said, like, we'd like you to sort of take over the team. And I said, oh, I'm not ready to sort of stop playing yet. Um, I'll I'll take over if I can play as well. Um, and they were like, well, we need to find out from the league and stuff. And got back to me and said, that's fine.
that's fine.
So the last season with Peterborough, I ended up taking over, and yeah, really, really enjoyed it. We won the league that season as well, but
Of course you did.
yeah, yeah, because of obviously the lockdown and stuff that had happened, a lot of clubs were cutting funding for their disability teams and
Yeah,
stuff. So Peterborough were one of those, obviously being a lower league club,
yeah,
their disability football wasn't so much a priority. So we didn't really have the kit we needed. We didn't really have any training facilities. Um, we didn't really have any sort of in comparison to the other amputee teams. We didn't have sort of substitutes jackets and tracksuits and things in the colder months to keep you warm and dry. Um, and Peterborough weren't obviously prepared to sort of fund those sort of things. They were
yeah,
things we'd have to just buy ourselves. And for the squad, it was a lot of young players and students and stuff, so couldn't
yeah,
really justify all of that. So we had a meeting, and I said, how does everybody feel like if we can keep this squad together, um, about approaching other clubs and seeing if they'll take us on. And everyone was in agreement that we
yeah,
wouldn't lose anybody. No one really had a particular affiliation to Peterborough United. So it was, as long as we stay as a team,
yeah.
like, see what you can
Doesn't
do.
matter who takes it.
So I sent out about 40 different emails to the likes of sort of West Ham, Watford, Leicester, like all different ones. And I said to my wife, so I'm going to send one to Chelsea just on the off chance. Like, I said, what's the worst that can happen? Like, most of them hadn't got back to me. I said, I'm not expecting a response, but um, and then a couple of days later, we were actually in a cab. We were on the way to Stamford Bridge. We were going to watch Chelsea Liverpool, and my phone rang, and I answered it, and it was this bloke that had picked up my email from Chelsea, and he's like, "I've read your email, and we're really interested."
Brilliant.
I was like, "I'm actually on my way to the bridge now." And he was like, "Oh, well, we'll chat next week." And I was like, and I said to my wife, I was like, "That was Chelsea, like they're
That's
interested."
amazing.
Um, and then we had like a Zoom call and stuff, and then another one where they could talk to the players. I put together like a wish list. So obviously training facilities.
Yeah.
I thought if we're going to do it properly, and could we get a junior program set up? So for children that are amputees, can we offer something for those?
Yeah.
Um, and they agreed to all of it, and it was like, it's actually happening.
That's amazing.
And then the league were happy; they were supporting us um, to obviously make the switch from cutting ties with Peterborough and becoming Chelsea. And we thought it's a great thing for the league, more positive exposure. And then the club organised for our first training session, and all of our training sessions were going to be at Cobham. And yeah, I mean, the drive down, I was so happy. And then you
It
pull
must have
in,
been surreal.
yeah, you're pulling into that training ground, and it's like home of Chelsea Football Club. Everything's pristine and like,
That's
wow,
brilliant.
yeah,
What a confidence boost for the team in general, do you know, and such a level of acceptance there, that not is it the team, they're not getting like treated as in second class in any way. They're getting the use of the top facilities that
yeah,
the first team use. You're getting the best of kit. You're getting basically accepted as part of Chelsea's family, Chelsea's football club family. You know, it must have worked wonders for you and your teammates in terms of how confident they would have been in progressing
yeah,
amputee football in general. A much higher profile as well, than no disrespect to Peterborough, but having
yeah.
Chelsea support amputee football as a sport must have opened doors for so many people in different areas as well.
And that's yeah, just to we were able to attract 3 or 4 players that weren't even aware of the sport before.
Yeah,
Um, and so to then obviously have the luxury to say, "Come to Cobham," obviously that in itself is a wow factor.
yeah,
Um, and Chelsea was sort of adamant that, you know, all the teams are equal. So you were made to feel like a part of Chelsea Football Club.
yeah,
And everything that because I'd had the season prior sort of coaching with Peterborough and playing as well at the same time, um, I was sort of being leaned on for advice and feedback. And so it was really nice that
yeah,
they valued what we thought as a team and how they could better it and sort of be more inclusive. And then that led to me being given the captaincy for the season as well, which, yeah, being able to lead Chelsea out as the captain was like, I've made like that was the moment where I was like, to some people they might not understand it, but I was glad I'd lost a leg at that point.
yeah, I understand. Yeah, I get what you mean.
It's just like, obviously my boys are both sort of Chelsea fans, like my wife is, and it's like, you know, for my boys to go into school and say my dad's the Chelsea captain, like, you know, and it just, yeah, the
That's
smile
amazing.
was massive. Um and then as the season got on, I'd because I'd enjoyed the coaching so much the previous season, I'd enrolled on my next UEFA course. And I'd been doing that as the season was going on. So it was a 4-month course. And then as that was going on, I was like, I originally it was going to be something to fall back on in a couple of years' time. And as the course was going on, and you sort of you're taking on more and more, and you're learning the game more and getting a different perspective and understanding of it, it's like, actually, like, I've helped set up Chelsea. It's in a good place. It's got a good, strong squad. It's got
Yeah,
obviously children coming along to attend. I've left something in a better place than what I found it almost.
yeah,
And that's when I started to think, I I'm ready to go into coaching now. Like, this is what I want to do. Like, I'd I'd been able to, even if I'd only ever played one game for Chelsea, like I'd led Chelsea out as the club captain.
yeah.
It was like that was the pinnacle for me. So anything beyond that was a bonus. And then yeah, I just sort of got really stuck into the coaching side of it. And then yeah, made the decision that that
Yeah.
would be my final season, and I'd pursue the coaching side of it now.
You're now a coach at MK Dons, is that right?
Yeah, yeah, I was very fortunate. So obviously they're the club closest to us, and my mentor, my coach developer on my UEFA course, um, used to work in the academy there, and we had a real sort of good relationship. And um, it was nice. He spoke very sort of highly of me as a coach and as a person. And I said basically he'd ignited that sort of fire in me to want to go into coaching and make a
Yeah,
career of it. I said I've bounced from sport to sport, whereas I think now's the time. Like I said, I really want to work with children. Um, I said like I love children's enthusiasm for football, and they're just the fearlessness and the fun and the passion that
yeah,
they have for the game. And I was like, that's what I want to be around now. And he put in a good word for me at the Dons. Got me an interview, and I did say, I said, although I'm disabled myself, I said I'm keen to not be pigeonholed into only coaching
no, of
disability
course.
players.
Yeah,
I'd
yeah,
like to sort of, obviously when I did the courses, I did them alongside everybody else, and
yeah,
I said I'd like to be in the mainstream side of the game. So they offered me a role working with their under 11s, in their sort of development pathway, which is their step sort of prior to academy level football.
brilliant.
Um,
You love it.
and I absolutely love it. Like
Can
it's
see, you
it's
can tell.
yeah, it's 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 so different, and it's maybe what I needed. Obviously, on a football pitch, I've always had a bit of an edge, a bit of a fire in me. Sort of when I was growing up, that was always my release,
Yeah,
and I always felt sort of safe on a football pitch. So I always sort of played with a little bit more, uh, yeah, a little bit more sort of aggression. That's where I could
yeah,
let it all out, I suppose. And that's never really left me on the football pitch. So I played like that throughout. Um, but whereas to coach 10 and 11-year-old boys is sort of it's found a softer side of me, which only really my children have brought out in me before. Whereas to be on a football pitch every day, but to be around children, it's just I love
no,
it.
that's amazing. No, I'm
Uh,
so glad. I mean, I think that obviously we'll bring the kind of start to bring the podcast to a conclusion now, but I think basically, I think well, we're at an hour and 50 minutes, and I think
yeah,
you've
sorry.
smiled. You've smiled for about an hour and 45 minutes of them, and it's amazing to see. Obviously, your this podcast is kind of centered around resilience, and certainly I don't think yet I've spoke to anyone that has shown as much as you, Mark, and I mean that genuinely. To go through what you went through, both in your early years, and in your disappointment, with your with family life and school life, and then to reach the army, the career that you wanted, the career that was actually an escape and a place of safety for you, then almost cost you your life. Do you know what I mean? But you bounce back time after time, time and time again, through your like positivity, your determination, your compassion as well. And now you've basically succeeded in every single thing that you've set your mind to do, which is amazing. And now you're passing on that same enthusiasm and knowledge and passion, uh, not only in your own kids but also the kids of other parents as well through your coaching. So it's amazing. I've got a question for you. Would you change what happened to you if given the choice?
No, no.
No.
Like the experiences I've had since I lost my leg. One of the even taking the experiences away, obviously as a serving soldier, you spend 7, 8, 9 months of the year away, whether that's in
Yeah,
Kenya, Afghanistan, like even Brecon, and you're always away. And I always saw so many lads who missed so much of their children growing up.
yeah,
And the biggest positive for me above everything else is that as an amputee, it's allowed me to be a dad.
yeah,
I've sort of played a big part in my boys' sort of upbringing, and I can go to their football matches, I can pick them up from school, and like they'll grow up knowing me, and hopefully sort of obviously some of my traits will sort of rub off on them more than if I was just at the end of a phone in another country
Yeah, of
for 6
course.
months.
But you had planned, obviously, you had planned to serve your full term in the military. You
Yeah,
would have still been in the military just now, so your life has totally taken such a different projectile, basically. You know what I mean? But I'm glad you said that. I'm glad you said that you wouldn't change it for the world. Honestly, I look forward to releasing this because I think it's going to be popular and so many people will take inspiration from hearing your story. And you tell it so well. You tell it with a good bit of humour and stuff as well. And it's dark. It's so dark in places. But I found myself listening and kind of smiling through it weirdly as well for some strange reason. But Mark, thanks very much for joining us, mate. I really, really appreciate it.
yeah. No, it's been a pleasure. No, thank you. Like I said, for asking me. I always find it humbling that people want to speak to me. So yeah, no, thank you, mate. Like obviously, I've got a lot of admiration for what you've done as well. So
No,
it was
thanks,
a
mate.
pleasure to get the chance to talk to you, mate.
Good man. Cheers, Mark.
Yeah, no, my pleasure. Thank you, mate.